Hey, what's up folks, Jambook Reviews here, and today I'll be talking about 3 alternative manga anthologies. But before that, a brief history of alternative manga. A good place to start is with the godfather of manga, Osamu Tezuka. He put the medium on the map by creating some of the most iconic characters, redefining demographics, championing anime, and also by inspiring a whole generation of Japanese people to create manga. One of those people was Yoshihiro Tatsumi. Tatsumi was a fan of Tezuka's work but felt that there was something missing. You see, at the time, most of the manga being published was aimed at children, and the stories had a lot of cartoony elements. In fact, the literal meaning of the word manga is whimsical pictures. Tatsumi and his friends wanted to create more mature stories that were inspired by real life and movies rather than cartoons. So starting in 1956 with his story Black Blizzard, he created the genre of dramatic pictures or Gekiga. These stories were drawn in a more cinematic style and often showed the less glamorous side of Japan through lonely, violent, or tragic characters. Gekiga flourished in the book rental or kashihon market that peaked after World War II, as many citizens couldn't afford luxuries like comics. After the kashihon market folded, the popularity of Gekiga waned as there weren't many magazines willing to publish the stories. Then came Garo. Founded in 1964 by editor Katsuichi Nagai and artist Sanpei Shirato, Garo was the premier magazine for Gekiga and other avant-garde manga. It featured work from established creators like Tatsumi and Shigeru Mizuki, as well as rising stars like Kuniko Surita and Seiichi Hayashi. Garo also published work from Yoshiharu Suge, whose surrealist short stories are considered the best of the genre. The magazine's main audience was college-age students of the New Left, as it often ran stories about the downtrodden and revolutionary. This is exemplified by the flagship series in Garo, Sanpei Shirato's Kamui Den, a ninja tale about a Burakumin boy on the run from his feudal clan. Notably, a spin-off of Kamui was one of the first modern manga to get published in the West. After Kamui ended, Garo's popularity started to decline, and by 1991 it was bought by a gaming company aiming to go a more commercial route with the magazine. Seeing the writing on the wall after Katsuichi Nagai's death, several key staff members left Garo in 1998 to start their own magazine, Axe. Named after the anti-establishment Bob Marley song Small Axe, the new magazine aimed to be a spiritual successor to Garo, publishing creators from that era as well as providing an outlet for the next generation of alternative mangaka. Note that the term Gekiga is mainly used to describe work from the Kashihon and Garo era, similar to the way that the term underground comics is tied to Zap Comics in the United States. Alternative manga is a catch-all term critics use to group all the unique manga styles that are adjacent to or came after Gekiga, from Hetayuma and Iroguro to Gothic Kawaii and Neo manga. The 2010 anthology Axe Alternative Manga collects work from 33 artists featured in both Garo and Axe magazines. It was edited by writer Sean Michael Wilson with the assistance of Axe editor Mitsuhiro Asakawa. They aimed to create a book that would reintroduce the diversity of alt manga to a modern Western audience. The art styles in the collection range from the rudimentary to the classical Gekiga, the stereotypical manga to the atypical manga, the hyperrealistic to the surrealistic, and everything in between. The stories are equally varied. For example, the Takao Kawasaki story is about a salaryman who encounters a hitman on the job, but everything is not as it seems. The Kazuichi Hanawa story is about 2 women who join an underground wealth cult and end up getting more than what they bargained for. And the Akino Kondo story is simply about a woman who goes shopping for an umbrella one day. So we get everything from the pulpy to the allegorical to the mundane. I dug most of the art, but I liked about half of the short stories in the book, and there are 2 main reasons for this. The first is that because there are no rules when it comes to alt manga, Conventional storytelling methods are often ignored, resulting in stories that start and end without much happening. This can work for the surrealistic tales, which by their nature are illogical, but the more down-to-earth stories can suffer. For example, the Shinichi Abe story is about a night at his parents' house where he's basically just describing his father. That's all there is to it. It felt incomplete without context or conclusion. The other thing that weakened the anthology for me was that the comedic stories often relied on a juvenile sense of humor. For example, the Saito Yonosuke story is about a girl crossing the desert while being mooned by a naked giant. Yeah, not to mention the more questionable plots for other stories. Still, I do think Axe is a great collection because it shows both the strengths and weaknesses of alternative manga. It's probably the best introduction to Gekiga you'll find outside of the collected works of the classic creators. Definitely worth tracking down. Next up is the Tipping Point anthology from Humanoids. Humanoids is the English branch of the French comics company Le Humanoid Associé, founded by Moebius and his friends in 1974. They are best known for publishing the influential heavy metal magazine that featured work from some of the greatest cartoonists from around the world, including mangaka. Tipping Point was published for the 40th anniversary of Humanoids. The editors commissioned 14 visionary cartoonists to do exclusive stories around the theme of a tipping point, a point of complete change or no return. The mangaka featured in the book are not Gekiga artists by any stretch of the imagination, but their creative approaches are very distinct. Taiyo Matsumoto, for example, cites Moebius and Enki Bilal among his influences, and he switches up his art style to fit his stories. Naoki Urasawa, on the other hand, has a relatively consistent art style, with Tezuka as his main influence. Yet, in his Tipping Point story, he visually paid homage to both heavy metal and tokusatsu films. Very cool despite the coloring. Those two are quite famous, so I want to focus on the other three mangaka in the book. First up is Atsushi Kaneko. He's been around for a while and actually had a manga published in English back in '05. His art style has a very punk noir aesthetic that I don't see very often in manga. From his opening page with the title in graffiti on the wall, it has a very American look to it. In his documentary, Kaneko stated that he was inspired by cartoonists like Dan Clowes and Charles Burns, as well as punk rock music, so that explains a lot. His story in the book has a classic noir plot with a Yakuza member having a run-in with another crew, and Kaneko adds his own crazy twist to it. An interesting artist, I'm looking forward to his other work being licensed one day. Next we have Katsuya Terada. While he has done manga in the past, Terada is better known for his illustrations and character designs, having worked on projects like Blood the Last Vampire and The Legend of Zelda series. His frequently published sketchbooks have earned him the nickname Doodle King, and his art has been exhibited multiple times in Japan and the United States. His story is one of the shorter ones in the collection. It's a silent strip in which a Tengu faces off against another spirit. Here you can see his art style. The line work is very detailed but doesn't lose that sketchy quality. He cites Moebius and Otomo as influences. Very beautiful stuff. Last but not least, we have another creator from the Moebius Otomo school, Keiichi Koike. This guy is a bit of an outlier from what I've read. He started his career in the 70s at age 16 when he won a Tezuka Award for his manga Urashima. In the early 80s, he moved to the US where he briefly worked in television and also published a story in Marvel's Epic Illustrated. In '84, he returned to Japan and since then has been infrequently putting out manga, the most famous one being Ultra Heaven. His story in Tipping Point has a very simple premise. A group of guys catch and cook a weird fish. The execution of the story is insane. Just look at the detail and the flow of it. Apart from Moebius and Otomo, Koike's third major influence is psychedelic drugs, and you can definitely see that in the story. His first English collection is out now, so that's worth checking out, along with Tipping Point. Now for the last book, S32 from Kush Comics. Kush is a Latvian mini-comics publisher that's been around since 2007. They publish the work of indie cartoonists from Latvia and around the world. The S-Line is a series of themed anthologies that they put out periodically. For example, S41, originally published in March 2021, is titled Dogs, and all the stories are about dogs. And if you look at the list of cartoonists, you'll see people from far-flung places like Switzerland and Chile. Very impressive overall project. S32 is titled Japan and features unrelated short stories from indie mangaka. So in it, you'll see Garo veterans like Imiri Sakabashira, Axe contributors like Nishioka Kyodai, and newer talent like Nuto Guran. And that's what makes this volume stand out. We get to see the current generation of alt mangaka doing interesting things with the medium. One artist many of you will be familiar with is Yuichi Yokoyama. His style, dubbed neo-manga or neo-gekiga, emphasizes sound and movement over everything else. His strip in the anthology shows balls moving through a structure which I assume is either a gacha or pinball machine. It's a simple concept, but the art is just different from anything else I've seen in manga recently. Yuko Tateyama is another notable cartoonist in the book. Her art style has a very abstract appearance, mainly the characters and their surroundings. The things they interact with, like these musical instruments, are a bit more defined. It's great how she can convey so much with so little in her art. Story-wise, we get a similar variety to Axe. For example, this story by Mississippi is about a girl who's linked to a comet that's about to crash into the Earth. Very Hollywood. The Tatari Takayama story is another good one. It's about a guy who meets a mysterious woman at a bar one night and it changes his life forever. Very effective use of the shorter format with that one. There are aimless ones as well, like the Yimiri Sakabashira story, which is basically a girl and what looks like a kappa crossing a weird city. Beautifully illustrated, but still aimless. The artist that really stood out to me though was Tokushige Kawakatsu. In his manga, he combined ink and acrylic to create a very moody aesthetic, reminiscent of the best kind of melancholic indie films. The story is about a guy hanging out with a new girl after a breakup. It's simple and doesn't have a conclusion, but it has that vibe that made a lot of the older Gekiga stuff appealing. I'm looking forward to his other work getting translated one day. And those were the anthologies. By the time you see this video, they'll be a bit difficult to find, but now is still the best time to be getting into alternative manga. Yoshiharu Suge's Garo stories are finally getting published in English, and many of the other artists I've mentioned have books out as well. There are also 2 ongoing anthologies with similar content to S32 called Gleolia and Popokomi. You can track those down if you're interested in the newer stuff. So yeah, alternative manga is alive and well. Thanks for watching. Later.